OSHO, The Art of Dying, Talks on Hasidism, given at the OSHO Commune International, Pune, India. Discourse number 1.
Bhagwan, when Rabbi Burnham lay dying, his wife burst into tears. He said, "What are you crying for? My whole life was only that I might learn how to die."
Life is in living. It is not a thing. It is a process. There is no way to attain to life except by living it, except being alive, flowing, streaming with it. If you are seeking the meaning of life in some dogma, in some philosophy, in some theology, that is the sure way to miss life and meaning both. A life is not somewhere waiting for you. It is happening in you. It is not in future as a goal to be arrived. It is here now, this very moment, in your breathing, circulating in your blood, beating in your heart. Whatsoever you are is your life. And if you start seeking meaning somewhere else, you will miss it. And man has done that for centuries. Concepts have become very important. Explanations have become very important. And the real is completely forgotten. We don't look to that which is already here. We want rationalization. I have heard a very beautiful story. Some years ago, a successful American had a serious identity crisis. He sought help from psychiatrists, but nothing came of it, for there was none who could tell him the meaning of life, which is what he wanted to know. By and by he learned of a venerable and incredibly wise guru who lived in a mysterious and most inaccessible region of the Himalayas. Only that guru, he came to believe, would tell him what life means and what his role in it ought to be. So he sold all his worldly possessions and began his search for the all-knowing guru. He spent 8 years wandering from village to village throughout the Himalayas in an effort to find him. And then one day he chanced upon a shepherd who told him where the guru lived and how to reach the place. It took him almost a year to find him, but he eventually did. There he came upon his guru, who was indeed venerable, in fact, well over 100 years old. The guru consented to help him, especially when he learned of all the sacrifices the man made towards this end. "What can I do for you, my son?" asked the guru. "I need to know the meaning of life," said the man. To this the guru replied without hesitation, "Life," he said, "is a river without end." "A river without end?" said the man in a startled surprise. "After coming all this way to find you, All you have to tell me is that life is a river without end. The Guru was shaken, shocked. He became very angry and he said, "You mean it is not?" Nobody can give you the meaning of your life. It is your life. The meaning has also to be yours. Himalayas won't help. Nobody except you can come upon it. It is your life, and it is only accessible to you. Only in living the mystery will be revealed to you. The first thing I would like to tell you is, don't seek it anywhere else. Don't seek it in me. Don't seek it in scriptures. Don't seek in clever explanations. They all explain away. They don't explain. They simply stuff your empty mind. They don't make you aware of what is. And the more the mind is stuffed with dead knowledge, the more dull and stupid you become. Knowledge makes people stupid. It dulls their sensitivity. It stuffs them. It becomes a weight on them. It strengthens their ego, but it does not give light, and it does not show you the way. It is not possible. Life is already there, bubbling within you. It can be contacted only there. The temple is not outside. You are the shrine of it. So the first thing to remember, if you want to know what life is, never seek it without. Never try to find out from somebody else. The meaning cannot be transferred that way. And the greatest masters have never said anything about life. They have always thrown you back to yourself. The second thing to remember, once you know what life is, you will know what death is. Because death is also the part of the same process. Ordinarily we think death comes at the end. Ordinarily we think death is against life. Ordinarily we think death is the enemy. Death is not the enemy. And if you think death as the enemy, it simply shows you have not been able to know what life is. Death and life are two polarities of the same energy, of the same phenomenon. The tide and the ebb, the day and the night, the summer and winter, they are not separate and not opposites, not contraries, they are complementaries. Death is not the end of life. In fact, it is a completion of one life. The crescendo of one life. The climax, the final. But once you know your life and its process, then you understand what death is. Death is an organic, integral part of life. And it is very friendly to life. Without it, life cannot exist. It exists because of death. Death gives the background. Death is in fact a process of renewal. And death also happens each moment as life happens, because the renewal is needed each moment. The moment you breathe in and the moment you breathe out, both are happening. Breathing in, life happens. Breathing out, death happens. That's why when a child is born, the first thing he is going to do is to breathe in. Then life starts. And the last thing, when an old man is dying, will be he breathes out. Life departs. Breathing out is death, breathing in is life. And both are like two wheels of a bullock cart. You live by breathing in as much as you live by breathing out. The breathing out is part of breathing in. You cannot breathe in if you stop breathing out. You cannot live if you stop dying. The man who has understood what his life is allows death to happen. He welcomes. He dies each moment, and each moment he is resurrected. His cross and his resurrection are continuously happening as a process. He dies to the past each moment, and he is again and again born into the future. If you look into life, you will be able to know what death is. If you understand what death is, only then you are able to understand what life is. They are organic. Ordinarily, out of fear, we have created a division. We think life is good, death is bad. We think life has to be desired and death to be avoided. We think somehow we have to protect ourselves against death. This absurd idea creates endless miseries in your life. Because a person who protects himself against death becomes incapable of living. He is the person who is afraid of exhaling. Then he cannot inhale. Then he is stuck. Then he simply drags. His life is no more a flow. His life is no more a river. If you really want to live, you have to be ready to die. Who is afraid of death in you? Life is afraid of death. It is not possible. How life can be afraid of its own integral process? Something else is afraid in you. The ego is afraid in you. Life and death are not opposites. Ego and death are opposites. Life and death are not opposites. Ego and life are opposites. Ego is against both life and death. The ego is afraid to live. The ego is afraid to die. It is afraid to live because each effort, each step towards life brings death closer. If you live, you are coming closer to die. The ego is afraid to die, hence it is afraid to live also. The ego simply drags. There are many people who are neither alive nor dead. This is worse than anything. A man who is fully alive is full of death also. That is the meaning of Jesus on cross. it has not been really understood. Jesus carrying his own cross. And he says to his disciples, you will have to carry your own cross. The meaning of Jesus carrying his own cross is nothing but this, very simple. That everybody has to carry his death continuously. And everybody has to die each moment. Everybody has to be on the cross, because that is the only way to live fully, totally. Whenever you come to a total moment of aliveness, suddenly you will see death also there. In love it happens. In love, life comes to a climax. And hence people are afraid of love. I have been continuously surprised by people who come to me and say they are afraid of love. What is the fear of love? Because when you really love somebody, your ego starts slipping and melting. You cannot love with the ego. The ego becomes a barrier. And you would like to drop the barrier. And the ego says, this is going to be a death. Beware. The death of the ego is not your death. The death of the ego is really your possibility to live. The ego is just a dead crust around you. It has to be broken and thrown away. It naturally comes into being. Just as a traveler passes, dust collects on his clothes, on his body. And he has to take a bath to get rid of the dust. As we move in time, dust collects of experiences, of knowledge, of lived life, of past. That dust becomes our ego. Accumulated, it becomes a crust around you. It has to be broken and thrown away. One has to take a bath continuously, every day, in fact every moment, so that this crust never becomes a prison. The ego is afraid to love, because in love life comes to a peak. But whenever there is a peak of life, there is also a peak of death. They go together. In love, you die and you are reborn. The same happens when you come to meditate or to pray, or when you come to a master to surrender. The ego creates all sorts of difficulties, rationalizations, not to surrender. Think about it, brood about it, be clever about it. When you come to a master again, the ego becomes suspicious, doubtful, creates anxiety. Again you are coming to life, to a flame, where death will also be as much alive as life. Let it be remembered that death and life both become a flame together. They are never separate. If you are very, very minimally alive, at the minimum, then you can see death and life separate. The closer you come to the peak, they start coming closer. At the very apex, they meet and become one. In love, in meditation, in trust, in prayer, wherever life becomes total, death is there. Without death, life cannot become total. But the ego always thinks in divisions, in dualities. It divides everything. Existence is indivisible. It cannot be divided. You were a child. then you became young? Can you demark the line when you became young? Can you demark the point in time where suddenly you were no more a child and you became young? One day you become old. Can you demark the line when you became old? Processes cannot be demarked. Exactly the same happens when you are born. Can you demark when you are born? When life really starts? Does it start when the child starts breathing? And the doctor spanks the child and the child starts breathing. Then life is born? Or when the child got into the womb, the mother became pregnant, the child was conceived, then life started. Or even before that, when life exactly starts, it is a non-ending and a process of no beginning. It never starts. When a person is dead, when the breathing stops, then a person is dead. Many yogis have proved it now on scientific grounds that they can stop breathing and they are still alive and they can come back. So stopping of the breathing cannot be the end. Where life ends, it never ends anywhere. It never begins anywhere. We are involved in eternity. We have been here since the very beginning, if there was any beginning. And we will be here. We are going to be here to the very end, if there is going to be any end. In fact, there cannot be any beginning and there cannot be any end. We are life. Forms change. Bodies change. Minds change. And what we call life is just an identification with a certain body, with a certain mind, with a certain attitude. What we call death is nothing but getting out of that form, out of that body, out of that concept. You change houses. If you get too much identified with one house, then changing the house will be very painful. You will think you are dying. Because the old house was what you were. That was your identity. But it doesn't happen because you know you are only changing the house, you remain the same. Those who have looked within themselves, those who have found who they are, come to know an eternal, non-ending process. Life is a process, timeless, beyond time. Death is part of it. Death is a continuous revival, a help to life to resurrect again and again, to help the life to get rid of old forms, to get rid of dilapidated buildings, to get rid of old confining structures, so that again you can flow, and again you can become fresh and young, and again you can become virgin. I have heard a man was browsing through an antique shop near Mount Vernon and ran across a rather ancient looking axe. "That's a mighty old axe you have there," he said to the shop owner. "Yes," said the man, "it once belonged to George Washington." "Really?" said the customer. It certainly stood up well. Of course, said the antique dealer, it has had 3 new handles and 2 new heads. But that's how life is. It goes on changing handles and heads. In fact, it seems everything goes on changing, and yet something remains eternally the same. Just watch. You were a child. What has remained of that now? Just a memory. Your body has changed. Your mind has changed. Your identity has changed. What has remained of your childhood? Nothing has remained, just a memory. You cannot even make a distinction whether really it had happened or you had seen a dream. Or you had read in a book, or somebody has told about himself, whether the childhood was yours or somebody else. Sometimes have a look into the album of old photographs. Just see this was you, and you will not be able to believe. You have changed so much. In fact, everything has changed. Handles and heads and everything has changed. And still, deep down somewhere, something remains a continuity. A witnessing remains continuous. There is a thread, howsoever invisible. Everything goes on changing. That invisible thread remains the same. That thread is beyond life and death. Life and death are 2 wings for that which is beyond life and death. That which is beyond goes on using life and death as 2 wheels of a car, complementary. It lives through life, it lives through death. Death and life are its processes, like inhalation, exhalation. But something in you is transcendental. That art thou, that transcendental. But we are too much identified with the form that creates the ego. That's what we call I. Of course, the I has to die many times, and it has to die many times. It is constantly in fear, trembling, shaking, always afraid, protecting, securing. A Sufi mystic knocked at the door of a very rich man. He was a beggar, and he wanted nothing but enough so that he can have his meal. The rich man shouted at him and said, "Nobody knows you here, but I know myself," said the dervish. How sad it would be if the reverse were true. If everybody knew me and I was not aware who I am, how sad it would have been. Yes, you are right, nobody knows me here, but I know myself. These are only the 2 situations possible. And you are in the sad situation. Everybody may be knowing about you. who you are. You yourself are completely